Joe from Pretoria. Is everything all right? People talk, say things.
Hello?
Why didn't you tell me it was out of order? I suppose you think that's funny.
I'm not allowed out the front door.
Who says you weren't?
Them.
Who?
Them.
It was terrible out there. I could hear breathing.
We told you.
Are you worried about the man?
They hate us. That's the truth. They want to kill and torture every one of us. You can see it in their eyes.
Come now, Frederick. Do you dream about unholy things?
I really don't like what's going on here. There's something wrong, and that's a fact.
Wait. What did you dream last night? This manifestation of evil. You must be delivered from evil.
Well, yeah.
Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
Robservations with Robert Burnett.
Well, greetings, Imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and of course, the perhaps never to be defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, moi, myself. I'm, of course, right here in the Robservatory, Robcasting at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations, episode number 1063. Haven't done Robservations in a while. I'm sorry. Last week I flew to Atlanta. I went to Atlanta, Georgia, but then I had to testify in a court case. I was a witness for our Eisner Award-winning comic book writer, Paul Jenkins. He's a BAFTA nominee. He, of course, wrote Wolverine Origin. He created the Sentry that we saw in Thunderbolts. He's going to be... Well, I can't say that. I don't know if that's been announced yet. But anyway, he's just a great guy. Terrific man. And he took over directing the fan film Axanar project after I left in November of 2017. Now, I'd known Paul Jenkins since 2000. I met him through my friend Rob Pryor, and he was directing... The last time I'd seen him was he was directing a music video for White Zombie. And that was 25 years ago. And I knew he was taking over after I left the Axanar project. And he called me to acquire some things that he was told that I was keeping from him. And the impresario of that project, Mr. Alec Peters, I worked with him I was a believer, man. I finished Prelude to Axanar. I was the editor of Prelude to Axanar. I created the DVD and the Blu-ray for Prelude to Axanar. I made something called The Vulcan Scene. These are all on YouTube. You can watch them, and I was going to direct the feature. I'm not going to get into the whole debacle it turned into. We were sued by, well, I was not, but Alec Peters was sued by CBS for all kinds of things. It's a really crazy story, but it's a story that I never thought would continue on in the year 2025. But Alec Peters tried to sue me twice, once in Georgia, and now he's in a lawsuit and a counter lawsuit with Paul Jenkins, and I was testifying on Paul Jenkins' behalf. Basically, Alec Peters is accusing Paul Jenkins of being a bad director and a bad producer, which is ridiculous considering Alec Peters hasn't produced anything in this project in a decade, even though if you look at his social media, he's been trying to produce something for the last 8 years and hasn't been able to do it. So it was ridiculous, but it was really interesting. However, the court case, I kid you not, was in Cumming, Georgia, and they actually have a beautiful kind of a complex with City Hall and their courthouse. It's really beautiful, and this beautiful bucolic, the Georgia countryside. I mean, it's, it's suburban side, I guess. And I kid you not, the street down a block, the street that City Hall is on, is called, this is totally true, Tribble Gap. So here was a lawsuit across the country in Cumming, Georgia. I mean, you know, I should have said Cumming, I am in you, but I didn't. There was so many jokes that came to mind that I just didn't make because the whole thing was absurd. But Tribble Gap, it was on Tribble Gap. I kid you not. We had lunch on Tribble Gap every day. Actually, it's a pretty good burger place. Anyway, went and testified. The court case is still going on. Week 2 began today. So I don't know quite how it's going. Haven't heard. But you know what? It'll go into the book. The book that I write about my career. You know, I might not be rich or famous, but I certainly have stories. And I just keep acquiring them. But anyway, that was where I was. So I'm sorry if you missed me. I promise to be back. Remember, and I lost a bunch of subscribers too. Every time I post about my feelings about what's going on in the Middle East, I lose subscribers. So I'm sorry about that. But it kind of got me thinking about this day's topic. Everyone's favorite topic, politics. But it's not what you think. Trust me. So anyway, yesterday, kid you not, yesterday was the 38th anniversary of the debut of Star Trek The Next Generation. September 28th, 1987 was the debut of Star Trek The Next Generation. Now, it wasn't the same in all locales because Star Trek The Next Generation was syndicated. It was first run dramatic syndication. Normally, syndication was saved for things like talk shows and things like that. And, of course, syndication for old shows, sitcoms, and things like that for local stations. But one of the gambles, one of the things that Star Trek The Next Generation did that people forget now, but it changed the face of syndication. First run syndication was for a drama was not something that was really done back then. And Star Trek The Next Generation's success changed that. And then, of course, following in the wake of that, Paramount made a lot of other shows like Mission Impossible, believe it or not, War of the Worlds, which was actually tied to Star Trek in a unique way, but I won't get into that. It's a long story. But and then, of course, UPN eventually resulted out of that, Paramount, the United Paramount Network, and they did some cool shows that lasted a season, one with Bruce Greenwood called Nowhere Man that I really liked, kind of a Prisoner-esque updated show. But so Star Trek The Next Generation turned 38. Now, for me, it was very interesting. When Star Trek The Next Generation came out, I was at the Evergreen State College in Washington State before I moved to California and started up at USC. But I was at the Evergreen State College, and I lived at the time in A dorm. So this would have been 586. No, maybe I didn't live in A dorm. Maybe I lived in C dorm at the time. Maybe it was C dorm because I lived in A dorm 85, 86. But I think I lived in C dorm then. That must have been it. But anyway, at the bottom of A dorm, they had a little it was like a nook, a TV nook. And they had these these cabinets, but you could open them up. They had TVs on either side. Like there was 4 TVs in each nook. And so you could watch all the way around. I don't know if it's still there. I mean, does anything look the same on a college campus the way it looked? I guess the exteriors of buildings do, maybe some interiors, but I don't know if Evergreen does. I've only been back to Evergreen once since I left. And that was a couple of years ago, actually. And I daisy-chained all the TVs to this one VCR that was also in one of those nooks. And since Star Trek The Next Generation debuted in California a couple days before it was playing in Washington State, I had my friend Taylor White videotape it and FedEx me the tape. So I put on the Washington State premiere of Star Trek The Next Generation at the Evergreen State College. And it was kind of a big deal. You know, I went around campus and made little flyers and told everybody about it. And I swear to God, I just left the tape there and people played it, rewound it and played it. It must have been in constant, it was being played constantly for at least 48 hours. And it was kind of a thing. It was kind of an event. Star Trek The Next Generation debuted. And, you know, I actually liked obviously the first 2 seasons of Next Generation feel very stilted. It feels like a show out of time that doesn't quite, it's trying to be Star Trek, but they haven't really, it's trying to be something that it's not really yet. So the first 2 seasons of Star Trek The Next Generation are kind of an interesting, there's a lot of turnover in the writer's room, and I don't need to go over it. You all know about it, the first 2 seasons. There are some great episodes in the first season of Star Trek The Next Generation. I do like Encounter at Farpoint. Coming of Age was a good episode. Heart of Glory, the first Klingon episode. 10111001 with the Binars is a favorite episode of mine. The Big Goodbye is a fun big holodeck episode with Lawrence Tierney. Cyrus Red Block. Then, of course, the return of the Romulans in the last episode, the Neutral Zone. But it's stilted. But there is still joys to be had. It really wasn't until, as everyone would tell you, until Michael Piller came on board in the 3rd season. Ira Stephen Bear worked in the 3rd season, but it was still, as Ira Stephen Bear will tell you, that season 3 had already gone to shit when he came on board, although season 3 is one of the strongest seasons of TNG, arguably, with episodes like Yesterday's Enterprise in it. But for me, Next Generation, obviously, I've talked about it a lot. Roger Lays Jr. and his company, Urban Archipelago Films, was hired to do all of the special features for Star Trek The Next Generation and Star Trek Enterprise. And we happened to be working we worked at Landmark Entertainment. He was doing a documentary about Mark Scott Zachary called The Table with Anna Barreto, who was working at CBS. They were doing it together. And then I was editing a film that's still sitting on a shelf that I think is quite good called My 11th, which is about a serial killer. And so we would say hi to each other every day. And then Roger knew who I was, and he got the job. And then we spent 3 years of our lives, all we did was make Star Trek documentaries for CBS. And we were the only Star Trek production. Paramount was making the J.J. Abrams movies, but during that time, we were the only CBS Star Trek production going. And even though they were, obviously The Next Generation was the entire restoration of Next Generation was one of the most enormous undertakings really in television history. Subsequent to Star Trek The Next Generation, The X-Files was restored, but a lot of the what made it so hard was a lot of these shows, especially Star Trek, to cut costs. Even though they shot all the models and they did all their special effects, they shot them on film. They were composited, and the show was finished on NTSC videotape. And that's standard definition videotape. And the effects, they would literally daisy chain sometimes 10 VTRs together, and they would send a signal through and combine all the shots onto one piece of tape, which is why space never really looked black and you could never see very many stars. But with the restoration that CBS undertook at the behest of Big Daddy Ken Ross was in charge of home video. He was a legend in the home video world. He, along with Andre Blay had started Magnetic Video, which was the first really big video company that later became 20th Century Fox Films. But Ken Ross worked for Magnetic Video. I always kind of thought of him as the Tony Soprano of network executives, because he was a New Yorker. He was big, he was bold, he was brash, he didn't take any shit, and he could really pretty much make anything happen. And he really went out on a limb and got all the money that it needed. It was not cheap to do that restoration because they went back into the negative, and which is the right way to do it. Don't tell me about AI upscaling. It's a bunch of bullshit. What you want to do is you want to go back into the negative and get the best image quality you could, and Ken Ross made that happen. And at the time, Next Generation was remastered in 2K, because we're talking about it started in 2011 and went 2012, 2013, 2014, and all 178 episodes of Next Gen were remastered, and we did all of the documentaries. So I got to sit down and interview most of the cast and the major crew of Next Gen, and it was amazing. And I put up on my YouTube channel, and I think I did it on Twitter, one of my favorite things was when we were doing the season 2 set. It was the 25th anniversary of Star Trek The Next Generation, and there was a 25th Star Trek The Next Generation cast reunion in Calgary, in Canada. And there's a big event there, a big pop culture expo, and they were up there. And I had suggested to Ken, I said, I talked to Roger about this, and I said to Ken, there's a 25th anniversary reunion, and wouldn't it be great? We were going to get to sit down and interview each cast member. We had 2 sessions of 2 hours apiece, so I got to sit down and interview the entire cast, beginning with Patrick Stewart, for 2 sessions, so 4 hours total, and the results of those interviews would be spread out all over all 7 seasons of our discs. And so, since it was my idea, I said, we should get like a celebrity guest host to host this reunion. Ken Ross looks at me and goes, "You're doing it." And this was before I was really comfortable being on camera like I am now. Am I? But so I sat down with the entire cast and ran this roundtable discussion. The thing was, I hadn't met them yet. I hadn't sat down individually and interviewed them. But you can see the results of that on the season 2 Blu-rays. And if you buy the Picard set that has all 3 seasons of the new Picard show, they have all the Next Generation movies, and they have all 7 seasons of the series with all of our documentaries. The only thing it doesn't have is, in addition to the 7 seasons that we had done, we also did 5 extra discs where we took 2-parters and released them as movie-only versions. So you could get Best of Both Worlds, you could get Redemption, you could get Unification, you could get Chain of Command, and you could get All Good Things as movie-only versions, and we did more special features for those. So those more special features were not included in the box set because they weren't in the masters. But you can find those single discs and there's some good stuff. I did a great interview with Ronnie Cox, who played Edward Jellicoe, that's on the Chain of Command disc. Anyway, so I got to sit down with the entire cast and crew of Next Generation and interview them, host a roundtable discussion. This was back in, as I said, 2012 for the 25th reunion. And I was totally nervous. But I did post, somebody posted it. If I post it on YouTube, it gets taken down right away. But somebody else had posted it, so you can find it on my social media. I put it up yesterday. I've put it up before in the past. But if you want, you can sit down and watch the Bobster here, talking about myself in the third person, doing an interview with the entire cast, the main cast, and of course, Wesley Crusher, Will Wheaton. And it's a lot of fun. Basically, I just kind of prompted them and prodded them, got them going, and I stayed out of the way. I think that's always the best thing to do, especially when you get people like that together. I don't need to insert myself. Nobody wants to hear me. So I would throw out some questions and then let them riff. But it was really cool, and we shot it like a network special, and very proud of that. So thank you, Ken Ross, for allowing us to do that. And thank you, Roger Lay Jr. and Mike and Denise Akuda, who oversaw the whole thing. Anyway, 38th anniversary of Star Trek The Next Generation. And I think that overall, Star Trek The Next Generation is probably everybody's favorite Star Trek series. I mean, it could never supplant the original series for me, but I think that for the most part, Next Generation is the show that is probably the most beloved Star Trek show for a number of reasons. And I think first and foremost, it's the stories that were being told. Great Star Trek, the original series, Next Generation, not so much Deep Space Nine, but the Next Generation and Star Trek, the original series, are anthology shows with recurring cast. Meaning that every episode, for the most part, is different. Sometimes Next Generation, there's only 1 2-part episode in the original series, The Menagerie. Next Generation had some multi-part episodes, and then there was some recurring storylines that were running through, but it wasn't slavishly devoted. It was not a serialized show like other shows have been, but it was great. And what's interesting about Next Generation is because the color palettes that they chose, if you look at it now, some people might think it looks 80s, but I think it looks sort of out of time. Other things I think look out of time. I think Tron, when you get into the digital world, nothing has ever looked like that before or since. So the original Tron has a really interesting look to it. But Next Generation, especially the remastered version where the blacks are inky black now, and the visual effect shots, which were all shot on film, look amazing. They only had to use a few times. They had to recreate certain shots in CG when the negative was either damaged or they couldn't find it. But that's few and far between in the restoration. But Star Trek The Next Generation and what you're seeing broadcast now are all the remastered versions. But it has a really interesting look to it. And I think what's great about Star Trek The Next Generation and what's great about shows like The Twilight Zone and things like that is that they work. They're very political shows. They deal with political issues, but the thing is, the politics within the shows are in-universe politics. So you're not being necessarily beat over the head. Sure, you can say that classic episodes like Let That Be Your Last Battlefield from the original series, when someone's black on one side and white on the other, that's obviously very didactic and preachy. But one of the things about Next Generation was it was the alien races or the situations that they would find themselves in where they could allegorically dive into current day politics. But because it was couched in Star Trek and in a science fiction, fantasy, action, adventure context, it made the politics not necessarily divisive for the audience. Everybody knew what was going on, but you're able to distance yourself, and you can ruminate over the ideas and not say, well, you know those damn libtard Dems or these MAGA Republicans. It wasn't like that. It presented these ideas. It showed you a scenario. Excuse me. And it allowed you to decide. And I think obviously people have sides that they have things that they believe in, but I think great writing does not alienate audience members. Great writing, especially in a fantasy context, science fiction, fantasy, and even horror context, presents ideas and allows you to mull over those ideas. The old adage, they don't tell you what to think. They tell you what to think about. They present to you scenarios, and you can reject them or you can accept them. The point is that you get to decide, and you get to come away from the very best episodes of, say, Next Generation, like watch The Drumhead. Incredibly political, very much of today. It could have been torn right out of the headlines. But you watch that and you don't feel that it is, because at the time they tried to write timeless episodes that touched on things from real history, but they weren't necessarily going for something out of the headlines. They were looking for something that, what does a democratic society have to deal with? And one of the things that they've never told you, and no one will ever really say this, but it's definitely true, the original series had that Camelot spirit kind of derived from Kennedy's White House. But the idea of Star Trek in its sort of conception is what would the universe be like if Earth could carry forward constitutionalism into space? What would that look like? And it was definitely, and that's why Star Trek was not necessarily accepted all around the world for various reasons. But it really was about what does constitutionalism look like in the 23rd and 24th centuries. And to begin, for tonight's show, I found an article about this, and this is just a quick piece I found. All the things that I want to read, I'm probably not going to get to them all, are linked down below. I put all the links, as I always do, of the articles I read, so you can go follow along. And also, if you want to leave a tip, the tip link is there too, or you can leave a super chat if you want, or you don't have to do that at all, but you can if you want. And so here's the first article I found, and I don't actually know. I was looking at the website, and his name's not there. But anyway, the political philosophy of Star Trek. Now, this article was written. I don't know why this Wikipedia. This was written on October 23rd, 2012. So this was a piece that was posted. And why I thought it was interesting is we were working on the documentaries at this time. And I thought it was kind of interesting that this article was written while we were asking the writers, how do they come up with these kinds of stories? The political philosophy of Star Trek: individualism, not socialism. Star Trek sometimes catches flack for portraying a socialist space utopia. There's a vast, far-reaching central government, and Captain Picard often waxes, especially when time travel gives him the opportunity to lecture present-day people about how humanity has evolved beyond self-interest. Those interested in personal gain are portrayed in a less than flattering light. Our era, with hundreds of national governments, is reflected on smugly as the age of confusion. But should Star Trek be totally thrown out for its political philosophy? I believe there's more to redeem it than to condemn it. The economics of Star Trek, given the technology, are not so far-fetched. Replicator technology would enable the utopia of the Star Trek universe by eliminating physical scarcity of most things. Even energy scarcity isn't something one has to worry about except in extreme circumstances thanks to antimatter-powered warp cores. Granted, this point is, so far as I'm aware, never emphasized, but if marginal costs fall sufficiently across the board, the entire price system could plausibly become more costly than its benefits. Harold Demsetz argues near the end of his paper, The Exchange and Enforcement of Property Rights, attention is sometimes called to the fact that emerging technical developments will make the use of markets or governments more economic than they are now. There are surely many instances where this is true. However, our analysis suggests that technological developments can operate in the opposite direction. Markets or their government alternatives should come into greater prominence only if technical developments lower the costs of these institutional arrangements more than they reduce the costs of producing. Replicators and warp cores clearly reduce raw costs of production more than they reduce the cost of government or the market mechanism. One could imagine a story where after hundreds of years, the question of allocation by the price mechanism becomes outmoded, and the economics of scarcity fall into disuse. Nevertheless, despite the negative portrayal of capitalists, there is a more fundamental theme: individualism. Though Starfleet might fairly be called a socialist utopia, it is not always a perfect one. One of the most common themes in each of the series is the captain's deliberate defiance of a direct order, thereby saving the day. Success-wise, captains have a vastly better track record than Starfleet, illustrating well the knowledge problem of centralized government. Naturally, though, Starfleet never does back off the regulations and directives. It's apparently fine to violate them so long as things work out in the end. Star Trek is in fact rather schizophrenic in its attitude toward its utopia. Generally, it's good and enlightened, although often misinformed, having to be corrected by intrepid Enterprise captains. Occasionally, though, Starfleet embodies every problem of tyrannical government, making the captains not only occasional rule breakers with exceptionally good judgment, but outright traitor heroes. The story of Insurrection, for example, puts Starfleet barely short of genocide, forcibly relocating an eternally youthful race to another planet where they would eventually die. The crew of the Enterprise, infected with the planet's youthful vigor, reneges against Starfleet and saves the Baku, and there is never a bit of moral ambiguity in their decision. These themes come to the forefront in Voyager, where the crew has to make its way without the benefit or burden of nearby Starfleet. If Picard's driving ideology is altruism, Janeway's is explicit individualism. How many times throughout the 7 of 9 rehabilitation subplot did Janeway lecture Seven on the virtues of individuality? She's even been known to directly lecture the Borg Collective on the evils of collective consciousness. She called them a race as close to pure evil as any race we've ever encountered, referring unambiguously to the forcible and imperial suppression of individuality. So Star Trek promotes a socialist utopia with a strongly individualistic culture. Star Trek has always had a moralizing component to it. Though their stereotype of capitalists could be called unfair, their utopia doesn't necessarily do injustice to economics, thanks to the replicator. So despite a political structure that would translate disastrously into our present world, the strong individualist themes of the show command it far past its unfair stereotypes. Condemn it. Now, I thought that, that's not a very deep or article, but it's a jumping off point. I will take you other places. But, everyone talks about it lately, of course, more than ever. I think I've heard more about, Star Trek is a communist future, Star Trek is a socialist future. Look, I've always believed it's a post-scarcity culture where individualism is stressed, but there is still things like private property. Picard has a chateau. Sisko's dad has a restaurant. I would assume he owns it. And maybe that's a choice people can make. But I've always thought what's really interesting about fandom, especially now, is that fandom, I hear this all the time, Rob, I don't want you to talk about politics, which I've thought was very, and I get this more often than not, you're a better speaker about movies than you are about politics. And I've always felt that was sort of unfair because a lot of my favorite stories are political in nature. I think most stories are political in nature, but what they usually aren't, the things that we love. When you're watching Captain America, the Winter Soldier, that's a very political film, but it's allegorical. it's not really hitting, I mean, sometimes it's hitting things directly on the nose, but since it's Hydra, you know, and since you're looking at the Marvel Cinematic Universe and you're looking at S.H.I.E.L.D. infiltrated by Hydra, which is pretty dire. You know, a lot of people, if you were to say that it wasn't Hydra and if you were to say it was our government today and you were portraying Donald Trump as the president, it would be a much different thing. But great science fiction fantasy doesn't do that. That's why we always have fictional presidents. Sometimes you have movies that have the real president, like President Clinton's in Contact. That means that Contact, obviously that didn't happen, but having President Clinton in the movie makes it immediate, and it sets it in a current time and an alternate universe, because we know that that kind of contact didn't happen in the real world, and nobody is sitting there going, well, this movie was pro or anti-Clinton. It just was a story about what would first contact with an alien civilization look like, and it was set during the time when Robert Zemeckis decided to use a real president, also because he had the technology that he could pull that off. Now we see that as par for the course in alternate universe shows like For All Mankind, of course, co-created by Ron Moore, who co-created, he began his television career in Next Generation, and he co-created Battlestar Galactica, which is one of the most overtly political science fiction shows ever made. And, you know, I've never heard people really complain about it, but it's interesting. I think what people complain about today is they don't like the politics of today infecting their shows. And I think, you know, a lot of people say to me, like, how can I be friends with Critical Drinker or Gary Nerdrotic, Gary Beekler? Because they push back against this. They push back against modern day activist politics in fantasy shows that have been injected. And I think they're absolutely right. And I think that really turns the audience off. It turns me off. It turns me off when I'm seeing we're watching a Star Trek episode, Star Trek Discovery, that's set in the 31st century, where a non-binary character is telling two gay characters to use their pronouns. And I'm thinking to myself, we're 1,000 years in the future where we've had multi-species relationships. We're so far beyond anybody giving a fuck about your pronouns or your sexuality or your personal identity. And what that kind of politics in Star Trek is, one, it's totally unimaginative. Two, it's the writers are preaching to you. They're telling you that we know better, so we're telling you what to think. They're not allowing the show to what all great fantasy, science fiction, and horror shows do. They present a situation and they allow you, they don't tell you what to think. They tell you what to think about. And that's not what modern genre television has been doing. And that's what people get angry about, because what that is, it's alienating. You're alienating your audience on a number of levels. Not that, you know, I think the intentions are good. The problem is when you start injecting your politics. Not everybody has your politics. So to expect everybody who's watching your show what you've done, Stacey Abrams being the president of Earth, well, how'd that work for you? You know, when you look at And the Children Shall Lead, nobody remembers who Melvin Belli is anymore, so it's okay. But, I mean, Stacey Abrams as the Federation president of Earth, how many boxes were you ticking doing that? And I understand there's a lot of celebrities or there's a lot of politicians or people that love Star Trek that want to be in it, and that's fine. But look, Mick Fleetwood was an alien fish creature. You didn't even know it was Mick Fleetwood. But when you cast Stacey Abrams as the president of the Earth, you're making a statement. And half of your audience doesn't believe in what you're saying, and that becomes immediately alienating. And plus, it takes you out of the reality that the TV show is trying to create. And I think that's what people are pushing back against. I mean, I don't necessarily think that having conversations about human rights or conversations about race or conversations about religion are bad, especially in the context of a fictional structure. But when you try and make them overtly about us and not allegorically about us, then people get turned off. And that's when people don't want to talk about politics. And they don't want to necessarily hear me address today's political situations because that's not what I'm known for. And to be honest, I'm not a political scientist. But I think that every single human being on earth should be politically aware. And one of the reasons I love great storytelling is because I've received much great insight into politics and religion and human systems, economic systems. I don't know why I'm so attracted to movies like The Big Short, but I can watch The Big Short over and over and over and over again and follow it up with a little chaser of margin call. I have no money. I have no wealth. But I love movies about economic systems, however those economic systems work. I mean, Wall Street, arbitrage. What the hell does that mean? Well, you watch movies, you find out, you look it up. Those are the things that made me interested in systems. And I've always loved how government works. I'm a sucker for a legal thriller. Show me a legal thriller, and I mean, that to me is like intellectual cocaine. That's why The Verdict is one of my favorite movies. I remember watching E.G. Marshall and The Defenders when I was a little kid. I loved legal because it felt like that's why going to a legal proceeding this past week, I haven't really participated in many. Certainly, I never was a witness in court before. It took me this long, took me 5 decades to finally be a witness in a courtroom. What that says about me, I don't know, but I certainly love it. I could discuss legal issues. I'm fascinated by the legal system. I think maybe I would have made a good lawyer, maybe. I don't know if I could have remembered all the precedents, but I would like to have done that. But it bothers me when people say, well, I don't want to talk about politics. But great storytelling has politics in it. And I love discussing politics within the context of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. That's one of the reasons I loved The Twilight Zone. It was so thought-provoking. Loved Star Trek The Next Generation because it had a lot of issues. It was even more sometimes issue-oriented than the original series. Even though the original series, court-martial, I mean, maybe that's why I love legal thrillers, because of court-martial. Alicia Cook, was Elijah Bailey. And he was a lawyer that was presented in an amazing way. You love that guy. And so maybe that's why I love legal thrillers. Everything was instilled in me by Star Trek. It really was. For better or for worse. And Next Generation obviously ran 7 years and 4 feature films. And when Next Generation started cooking, season 3 onward, there was some really interesting stories. I mean, look, Measure of a Man in the 2nd season. And the only way, a lot of people forget this because they don't show it on TV. There is an extended version. Melinda Snodgrass, the great Melinda Snodgrass, wrote that episode. And we were able, one of the great joys of doing the Blu-ray series is in the season 2 disc. And if you can get the individual seasons, but if you buy the season 2 disc, it's not available. Why this isn't in broadcast syndication, I don't know. But there's the extended version. It's 13 minutes longer. Next Generation episodes were only 45 minutes. So 13 minutes longer, it's almost 25 minutes. It's almost 25% longer. But there's an extended version of Measure of a Man. They had to finish 3 special effect shots to get it done. But it's really compelling. You get to watch Picard and Riker. They're jousting with one another with foils. And it just makes that episode even better. And, is it a totally realistic courtroom drama? Perhaps not. But it's amazing. I mean, when they're arguing their case, we're looking for a new life. Well, there it sits. I mean, it's got great Picard and Riker moments. It's a 2nd season Star Trek The Next Generation episode, but it's one of the finest episodes of Star Trek ever made. And the extended version that they should be showing everywhere is only available on the season 2 Blu-ray. And that's kind of unfortunate. But hey, I would recommend, if you still collect physical media, to go get those discs. But that's another thing. It's frustrating in a time where politics, we live in our Constitution and our way of life has never been under as much threat as it has been in this second Trump administration. Whatever you're feeling about politics, I don't think it can be denied that the guardrails that protect our democracy are being dismantled on purpose. And when we have our president who said, while in the run-up to the election, I don't know what Project 2025 is, and yet 9 months into his presidency, his second term, he very much knows what Project 2025 is, and they're running that playbook. Now, is it political to say so? I don't think so. I think it's actually happening. When you're watching something that's real, that's actually occurring, it's not a matter of opinion. What should be a matter of opinion is, what are we all going to do about that? We have a government shutdown that is about to happen tomorrow. And why is it happening? Are we going to be able to avert it happening? If it does happen, what does it mean? Already, each side's already sharpened their knives, but we're in the middle of a huge political, I would say, more political dysfunction. It's happened before. It'll probably happen again. But is this something now, by bringing it up, does it bother people? I wonder, why does it bother people? Because we're going to live through it. We're going to see what happens tomorrow. There's going to be a government shutdown. And Pete Hegseth, why is the Department of Defense now called the Department of War? This was a political issue. Now, the question that every American should ask, regardless of your political affiliation, is, when you take our Department of Defense and rename it and call it the Department of War, the question is, why? What does that mean? Why was that done? Are we going into a war footing? Are we no longer interested in the defense of America? We're more interested in making war? I don't know the answers, but these are questions that every American should ask, because that department represents all of us. We are a government by the people, for the people. And one of the things that I love about Star Trek is it makes you ask questions that you can later go and look at our own government and apply. I mean, what if there was a peace-loving race that decided to what if it was known as the Planet of Defense, and then you had a group of autocrats come in, and they decided to change that to the Planet of War. Now, what about all the surrounding planets? What are they supposed to think now? And these are questions that Star Trek would deal with in a very interesting sort of a way that would be acceptable to the audience, and it would allow us all to ponder through how that story unfolded, what that meant. Now, some people just don't want to talk about it, and they'll turn it in. They'll start arguing with their fellow Americans, people that should all live under the umbrella of what are the rights and the freedoms that our Constitution and our republic provide to us. I would think that there is our all of us, regardless of what aisle you are on or whatever the dividing line is for you, whatever your political affiliation is, we all believe in the Constitution, yes. We all believe in our Bill of Rights, do we not? That should be the beginning of how we can always have political discourse, that the very foundations of the society that we live in, we believe in, don't we? So if that's the case, we should always be able to find some kind of political middle ground, because we the people, in order to form a perfect union, establish, provide for the common defense, all of that. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm trying to fight the impulse to sing. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. I won't. I'll spare that for you. That's a little Schoolhouse Rock. But that's what Star Trek does best. That's what great science fiction, that's what great speculative fiction does. It provides that framework for you. But I think that we shouldn't, especially now, we live in a time where we all need to figure out how our government and how our republic is going to move forward with all of our participation, hopefully looking out for our Constitution. I mean, certainly our military commanders are meeting in Quantico with Pete Hegseth tomorrow. And what's that about? I don't know. But are our military leaders going to be asked to pledge their allegiance to one man or one political party, or they're going to continue to uphold the U.S. Constitution, which is what all of them have sworn to do? And if they are told not to do that, which goes against the very Constitution that provides the world that we live in, what are we going to do? Well, this is when you look to episodes like the Drumhead in Star Trek. Hopefully that you can gain some insight there. Or in something like Measure of a Man. That's what Star Trek does best. And the problem is, I think that a lot of people want to put their head in the sand. And the great thing about Star Trek is it allows you to ponder these issues without getting mad. Now, that article I read was from 2012, and now I have another article about politics in Star Trek that I wanted to read that was actually published on September 11th, 2016. And it appears in the U.S. Intellectual History blog. And this is a much more extensive article. Let's jump into it. It's a guest post that was written by Mike O'Connor. By most metrics, the success of Star Trek The Next Generation, from 1987 to 1994, dwarfed that which its predecessor Star Trek had received on NBC during its initial 66 to 69 run. While the first show had to be rescued from cancellation after its second season by a viewer letter-writing campaign, its successor ran for 7 years with solid ratings. Star Trek The Next Generation substantially enlarged the core audience for Star Trek, and eventually its characters and time frame replaced those from the original series as the focus of the feature films. Since then, the movies have come to feature younger actors playing the characters from the original series. Yet TNG had a mission beyond delivering ratings and making money for its studio. Star Trek was more than a television show. It embodied a particular philosophy that was one of the central aspects of its appeal. Gene Roddenberry, the auteur behind Star Trek, who is widely credited for supplying the vision that characterized the Star Trek universe, described the show in his statement to the world as his political philosophy and his overview on life and the human condition. Roddenberry created TNG and worked on its first few seasons. His declining health and increasingly erratic personal behavior led to him being eased out of positions of authority before his death in 1991. The extent to which Roddenberry was personally influential on the vision of Star Trek The Next Generation is a subject for debate, but the larger significance of his philosophical and ideological blueprint is beyond question. Media scholar Henry Jenkins explained that the new series had to carefully negotiate between the need to maintain continuity with the original series in order to preserve the core Star Trek audience, and the need to rethink and update those conventions in order to maintain the program's relevance with contemporary viewers and expand its following. Philosophically, this meant that the later show had to distinguish between those ideas that were central to the ethos of Star Trek and those that needed to be modified or even abandoned to keep up with the spirit of the times. Both Star Trek series chronicled the adventures of a group of interstellar space travelers living centuries from now. The heroes serve aboard the USS Enterprise, a vessel in the Starfleet of the United Federation of Planets. The Federation is a governing body of planetary representatives of which Earth is a central member. Starfleet has dispatched the Enterprise to the furthest reaches of the galaxy with arguably conflicting tasks. On one hand, the crew is involved in exploration and scientific research, and on the other, it serves as the Federation's military and diplomatic representative far from the centers of power. As a result, the ship's crews are constantly brought into contact with ideas and practices that are different from theirs. Some situations are learning opportunities, while others invite danger and require force. One way or another, civilizations bump into another in Star Trek shows or series, and in many cases, such as the planets that come together in order to form the Federation, the results are a benefit to all. Other situations, however, invite conflict, cultural, intellectual, political, and occasionally military. Typically, these conflicts are resolved by some action taken by the captain of the ship. That position was filled in TOS by James T. Kirk, played by William Shatner, while Patrick Stewart and Jean-Luc Picard sat in the big chair in the later series. David Gerrold, a writer who worked on both shows, wrote in 1973 that when Star Trek was at its best, the captain's decision were the focus of the episode. Plot lines that placed their characters in some sort of a trap and then spent the rest of the episode freeing them are the easy story to tell. If Star Trek had been a truly dramatic series, then the essential Star Trek story would not have had to have been Kirk in danger, but Kirk has a decision to make. The decision is the core of every dramatic episode. The particular nature of Star Trek's format meant that these dramatic decisions frequently offered a fairly strong stance about some moral or political issue. But different problems and concerns characterized the time periods in which each series was produced. TOS and TNG shared the Star Trek name, but each series developed its own characteristic viewpoint. Among the different areas in which Star Trek articulated an opinion, central among these was the political one. I have argued elsewhere that TOS was a fundamentally liberal project, but that 21st century understandings of that doctrine cannot be read backward to apply to a 1960s television show. The first series embodied a creative tension between the Cold War liberalism and counterculture anti-militarism that competed to define late 60s liberalism. For the producers of TNG, updating those views in response to a world with different issues and new preoccupations was not an easy task. Roddenberry himself claimed that TNG represented the product of his mature thought, but the relationship between TOS and TNG is not best understood as that of a draft to the final copy. Instead, I would suggest that Star Trek The Next Generation represents the continuing articulation of liberal values as those values themselves were changing. By 1987, the Reagan Revolution was in full swing. Cold War liberalism was no longer an establishment philosophy. As a response to Reagan's escalation of the Cold War and willingness to back repressive anti-communist governments abroad, countercultural pacifism still existed. Yet it was rather marginal in its import, at least compared to its Vietnam-era heyday. Many Democratic politicians had abandoned the Great Society ideals of economic redistribution and confronting various forms of discrimination. These priorities, they believed, were unattractive to what they viewed as a more conservative electorate. The office seeker who embodied this strategy most successfully was Bill Clinton, a new Democrat who promised to leave behind much of his party's purportedly outmoded philosophical and political commitments. Clinton was elected president in 1992, in the middle of the Next Generation's television run. American liberals and leftists who felt that the Democratic Party had abandoned them despaired of seizing of the levers of power anytime soon. Thus, one of the most important expressions of late 20th century American liberalism became its theoretical and intellectual wing. And what many liberal intellectuals were advocating was some form of cultural relativism. This term denotes a somewhat vague idea that highlights the common features of several more comprehensive theories. Proceeding from the anthropologically established fact that values vary widely across cultures, relativists maintain that the only authority that moral and political distinctions can have is derived from their status as cultural standard bearers. Therefore, outside of their culture of origin, rules have no binding quality whatsoever. The theory itself is at least as old as ancient Greek sophist Pythagoras and his famous claim that man is the measure of all things, hence the measure of a man, but it enjoyed a renewed popularity in the academy of the late 20th century. Many of the most prominent waves of scholarship during this period, such as deconstructionism, post-structuralism, third-wave feminism, and neo-pragmatism, articulate, assume, or at least grapple with a relativist program. By the time that Star Trek The Next Generation premiered in 1987, cultural relativism had firmly implanted itself in at least a segment of the American population. By the late 1980s, the civil rights movement and Black Power had run their course. Voices for racial justice often spoke the language of identity politics, which focused on respecting the differences between cultures rather than appealing to universal standards of justice. After his Discipline and Punish was published in 1975, Michel Foucault's relativistic arguments became so influential that he became, in the words of historian Andrew Hartman, the most widely read theorist in American humanities since the 60s. In 1986, Carol Gilligan argued, in a different voice, that women and men possess different and incommensurable moral faculties. That same year, the author of Women's Ways of Knowing offered a parallel argument for a female epistemology. Though nearly all of these writers denied that they actually were relativists in a naive or vulgar sense, the doctrine increasingly came to underwrite liberal thought. Additionally, relativist ideas were finding expression in the language of non-intellectuals. In 1986, philosopher Stephen Satras called the attitude of student relativism one of the most serious, pervasive, and frustrating problems facing philosophy teachers today. Students faced with a professor asking whether such time-honored values as rationality, love, or an examined life were a necessary component of human flourishing will simply fly the flag of relativism by responding, "Who's to say?" Jesus, if only this article was written today. Hang on a second, I don't know why, but my eyes and the glasses. Okay. The rising influence of relativism was not welcomed in all corners. The same year that TNG premiered, Allan Bloom's The Closing of the American Mind climbed the bestseller lists. For Bloom, cultural relativism had completely taken hold of the college-age youth of the country, and its effects struck at the core of the Western tradition itself. Firmly entrenching itself since the 1960s, argued Bloom, relativism has extinguished the search for a good life. The idea that objective standards of discourse were being undermined by the incessant demands of women and minority groups to pay them linguistic respect spread throughout the country as the specter of political correctness. A host of other authors jumped on Bloom's bandwagon, including William Bennett, Dinesh D'Souza, and Roger Kimball. Whether or not Bloom et al. Were correct about the horrible damage that relativism was doing to our civilization, they were right at least about the fact that relativism was catching on as a prominent ethical discourse among the educated left. To the extent that relativism offered a dividing line between left and right, Star Trek The Next Generation was clearly on the left. In championing the new form that liberal values were now taking, however, it sometimes found itself at odds with its predecessor series. The clearest example of this new direction involves stories that featured the Prime Directive. This is the highest of the Federation's laws, and it says that those who serve on Starfleet vessels cannot interfere in the affairs or the development of a less technologically advanced culture. In the earlier series, this was typically justified by some reference to the human need for self-determination in order to flourish. What that meant in a practical matter is that in TOS, Captain Kirk frequently broke it. And when he did so, however, he justified his actions by some standard of self-determination which he believed to be objective. That is, if Kirk believed that interfering would make people more free rather than less, he would interfere. His attitude on these matters, then, reflected a form of the tradition of liberal humanism that one might associate with Locke or Rousseau. In this context, however, liberal humanism can seriously run the risk of confusing one's own values with the universal human standards that are supposed to characterize freedom. That is, the essential conflict in the liberal humanist project, one which can embody a healthy and creative tension. But by the time of TNG, this tension had been resolved so that the ideal of non-interference simply no longer referred to humanistic flourishing. Instead, it was about cultural integrity. As a result, the Prime Directive embodied a commitment to cultural sensitivity rather than to liberty. The fundamental values of the Federation were no longer rooted in the liberal humanistic claim that every people has its own right to self-determination and autonomy. Instead, they were now based on the claim that there is no Archimedean point from which to make value judgments. In the TNG episode Symbiosis, for example, the crew encounters two cultures, the Anarians and the Breccians. The latter planet owes its entire economy to the production of an addictive drug for the former. The Onarians believe that the drug is medicine for a deadly disease, but the Enterprise's Dr. Crusher discovers they've not had the disease in generations, and now the drug only saves them from the effects of the withdrawal symptoms. Crusher claims that this is a case of exploitation of one group by another. Picard's only response is, "That's how you see it." He does not claim that he sees it in some other way, for presumably he does not. In this sense, he responds very similarly to the "who's to say" of Satras's philosophy students. Instead, the fact that the values of the two planets' inhabitants may differ from those of the Federation is sufficient to demonstrate to Picard the immorality of even telling the Onarians of what he has learned. In the episode Half a Life, Lwaxana Troi, mother of the ship's counselor Deanna Troi, meets and falls in love with Timicin, a man from the planet Kalon 2, which orbits a dying sun. Timicin is a scientist, the one who is closest to the solution to the problems that plague his planet. Unfortunately, Timicin turns 60 in a few days, and his people undergo a ritual suicide as they reach that age. Lwaxana begs Picard to intervene, but he insists that the Prime Directive forbids us to interfere with the social order of any planet. After trying and failing to convince Timicin to abandon his culture by refusing to participate in the ritual, called the Resolution, Lwaxana and Deanna are discussing the situation. Lwaxana says, "I've never considered how deeply ingrained this resolution ritual is." Deanna says, "Ritual provides structure, both good ones and bad ones." Lwaxana says, "Well, this is a bad one." Deanna says, "Your point of view." Characters in the Next Generation routinely point out that each other's opinions are, in fact, their opinions. This somewhat cloying observation is tossed around as though it trumps any possible moral position. This is because, from a relativist perspective, it does. Even Timicin's daughter, who is upset that she can't watch her father die, takes the moral high ground with Lwaxana by asserting that the latter is culturally insensitive. "How dare you criticize my way of life and my beliefs?" In another episode, Who Watches the Watchers, the crew is assigned to repair an anthropologist stationed on the planet Mintaka. Their high-tech duck blind renders the scientists invisible so that they can conduct anthropological research without the planet's inhabitants knowing that they're there. During the repair, two Mintakans see the duck blind. In the process of investigating it, one accidentally hurts himself quite badly. Crusher brings him up to the ship for medical care, and Picard is not happy about it. Crusher says, "Before you start quoting me the Prime Directive, he'd already seen us and the damage was done. It was either bring him aboard or let him die." Picard says, "Then why didn't you let him die?" Crusher says, "Because we're responsible for his injuries." Picard says, "I'm not sure that I concur with that reasoning, Doctor." Here, Picard, the decision-maker on the Enterprise D, makes it clear that the maintenance of a culture's integrity is more morally important than the rights of the individual to his or her own life, to more common-sense notions of fair play. But the show does not take a consistent relativist line. Justice finds the crew on a planet whose inhabitants, the Edo, only punish randomly selected crimes. For any transgression, however, the penalty is death. When Dr. Crusher's son Wesley is unlucky enough to be in a punishment zone when he breaks a window, the full weight of the law comes down upon him. Picard tries to convince the Edo to return the boy to him, but at every turn, they best the captain in a moral argument. They point out that they did not ask the crew to come to their planet, that their society is based on respect for the law, and that they have no crime precisely because their laws are so strict. They even become resentful when Picard tells them that his society technology. The reasoning that supports such an action is inconsistent and problematic. Starfleet is a dangerous business, and the crew members die on missions with some frequency. Picard is willing to sacrifice those under his command for the goals of his mission. What he presumably is not willing to do is allow his crew member to die for an offense that he views as trivial. In this case, at least, Picard appears to take the line that Wesley's right to live is more important than the Edo's right to live by their own values. The idea that the Edo respect for order may in fact be a better way to organize society than his own emphasis on individuality appears to play no role in his decision-making. Thus, the Prime Directive, which could be a troubling but ultimately self-congratulatory nuisance for liberal humanist Kirk, is a site of serious tension, if not hypocrisy, for Picard. Mike Hartenstein has written that on The Next Generation, the Prime Directive was observed more strictly. That is to say, it was given more sophisticated lip service. Yes, Captain Picard will break the Prime Directive, but not without soul-searching and hand-wringing. On my reading, however, the issue is more challenging than that. The philosophy of cultural relativism has little relevance when the vast majority of people that you meet belong to the same culture. Few of us in the viewing audience have the opportunity to decide whether we should impose our moral views on a people who do not share them. Picard, in his fictional Star Trek universe, actually has to put this doctrine to the test. Thus, his problems are like a laboratory experiment in cultural relativism. To my mind, this experiment reveals two interesting results. The first is that telling a satisfying story with a relativist moral is a difficult, if not impossible, task. If the truly noble thing to do is to never interfere or impose, then a television episode trying to advocate such a trying to advocate such a course of action will consist of 44 minutes of our heroes debating and analyzing a situation before ultimately doing nothing at all. Hang on a second. Hold, please. I'm back. To my mind, hang on. To my mind, this experiment reveals two interesting results. The first is that telling a satisfying story with a relativist moral is difficult, if not an impossible task. If the truly noble thing to do is never interfere or impose, then a television episode trying to advocate such a course of action will consist of 44 minutes of our heroes debating and analyzing a situation before ultimately doing nothing at all. In the episode Symbiosis, discussed above, Picard ultimately decides not to tell the Onarians that they're addicted to the Breccians' drug. But he also decisively refuses to help them repair their ship, which he had earlier promised to do. By not repairing the ship, Picard is both refusing to interfere and at the same time helping the Onarians to realize their situation. Without a ship, they will not be able to obtain the drugs they so desperately desire. This episode does allow Picard to decisively and actively do nothing. But in general, a plot resolution that involves no decision or action makes for rather uninteresting television. The second result of the narrative experiment in cultural relativism is perhaps more important. That is that neither TNG nor presumably its viewers are entirely comfortable with its relativistic bent. Relativism is primarily a reaction against ethnocentrism, but not all desires interfere with another culture have such unworthy motives. In the episode Pen Pals, for example, the Enterprise's helmsman Data has been chatting via a sort of interstellar ham radio with a little girl who lives on a remote planet. Natural events are causing the girl's planet to disintegrate. When Data asks Picard to use the ship to save the planet, the captain takes the position that rescuing a group from a natural disaster without their knowledge leads down the slippery slope toward cultural imperialism. During the ensuing conversation between several Enterprise officers, each offers a slightly different take on what the ship should do. One even calls the Prime Directive callous and cowardly in this instance. Picard, claiming that one of the functions of the Prime Directive is to protect us from our emotions, finally decides that the ship will take no action to save the planet. At the very last minute, however, the captain overhears a transmission from Data's friend. He's emotionally moved and changes his mind. This is hardly a surprise. It's difficult, if not impossible, to imagine an American primetime television series in which the heroes would simply proceed on their way when they had the opportunity to save billions of people with little trouble to themselves. But it is nonetheless inconsistent. If liberal humanism runs the risk of an arrogant cultural imperialism, cultural relativism can lead to a shocking lack of concern for the welfare of individuals. TNG sees these problems, but does not offer a solution with any real confidence. Because Star Trek The Next Generation deals with problems that relativism raises, but does not have a compelling answer for them, many plot resolutions are rather wishy-washy. Even Pen Pals is not willing to take a clear stand on the issue it raises. At the very end of the episode, Picard orders that Data's friend's memory be wiped of any knowledge of the Enterprise, through a scientific technique that had not been mentioned up to the point in which it is used. If no one on the planet has any knowledge that Picard's ship was ever there, then in the sense the crew did not interfere. The captain can have his relativist cake and eat it too. Hartenstein has pointed out the prevalence of these deus ex machina endings, whereby a seemingly difficult moral choice is rendered unnecessary or inconsequential by a sudden turn of events. Yet even he fails to notice that the vast majority of his own examples come from TNG rather than TOS. In the episode Justice, discussed earlier, Picard takes Wesley from the Edo, but ultimately has to deal with their technologically superior god who is orbiting the planet. The god threatens to destroy Picard for interfering with the Edo, but Picard argues from a decidedly non-relativist position that there can be no justice so long as laws are absolute. It is the god rather than the Edo themselves that is the true arbiter of Edo morals. Thus, its approval of Picard's actions suggests that, in this case, the relativist and humanist projects yield the same result. But the audience is deprived of an answer to the really interesting question, the one that David Gerald says should define a dramatic episode. What people really want to know is, what would Picard have decided if he had to choose between violating the Prime Directive and allowing Wesley to die? In this case, Picard is allowed to violate the Prime Directive, but have his action blessed by the culture whose mores were fundamentally disrespected. Like Pen Pals, this episode slinks out of Picard having to take a stand on what values are most central to him. Philosopher Richard Rorty observed that the novel, the movie, and the TV program have, gradually but steadily, replaced the sermon and the treatise as the principal vehicles of moral change and progress. It is through these fictional forms, he argued, that we describe the kinds of pain we inflict on one another. Armed with this knowledge, we can hopefully begin to eliminate them. If Rorty is correct, then the inability of Star Trek The Next Generation to tell a compelling story with a cultural relativist message is of more than merely academic interest. It suggests that relativism as a comprehensive ethical system may never achieve more than a parasitical check on the tendencies toward ethnocentrism to which liberal humanism is always subject. This is still a significant contribution, one that should not be minimized. But the example of TNG also has a message for American political liberalism. Democratic politics is about the swaying of hearts and minds, and central to this endeavor is the ability to tell resonant, meaningful stories. The show's difficulty in articulating a consistent relativist position suggests that the extent to which the liberal political project is animated by this doctrine is the extent to which it is unlikely to succeed. I know, an academic article, but an article that I felt worth sharing. If you didn't get all that, I don't know if I did the best. My throat and having a cold, but it is linked down below. And I felt that that article was definitely worth sharing. And that was written by Mike O'Connor, a candidate for the Master of Public Affairs at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. He has published the article Liberals in Space, the 1960s Politics of Star Trek. So there you go. I hope you weren't too bored by that, but I found it to be very interesting. So let's see. I know you guys have some things you're weighing in, and I have been kicked out of my own show. How interesting. I don't know why I've been kicked out of my own show, but it happens. I've got to switch accounts, and that is very odd when YouTube does this. Maybe I can go back to going live. Yeah, how about that? How about I can go back to my live stream? Anyway, I'm not ending it. Let's see what you guys have to say. That was wild. So, Brett Dean says, yo, Skydance Paramount, it's not all in the hips. It's all in the writing. The dream team is out there. Ron Moore, Ira Stephen Bear, Terry Matalas, Nicholas Meyer. A good art team knows visual canon is canon, doesn't hurt. Here's the thing, Brett. I would say that why would we want the writers that wrote Star Trek 30 years ago to come back and write Star Trek now? Honestly, I would like to see different writers because we're getting new original works. Terry Matalas is working on Marvel's Vision series. I have never been more assured that there will be a better Marvel series than what Terry Matalas and his writing staff are working on. The idea of artificial intelligence, what does it mean? I've heard some things about the show, and I would imagine it's going to turn out to be pretty great. I would never have wanted Terry. I mean, sure, would I like to see a Star Trek Legacy show? It would be fine, but I would much rather have Terry do something original that we haven't seen before. Same with everybody. Ron Moore is now on God of War. Ron Moore is going to bring us the 5th season of For All Mankind, hopefully seasons 6, 7, and 8 too. I'd rather get something new from these guys. Nicholas Meyer was talking just recently this past weekend about being blacklisted from Star Trek, which is, my God, can you imagine? He wrote the 2nd episode of Discovery, but you would never notice that he never got credited for that. So Royston S. Bailey says, my favorite TV drama of all time. Worf had the best arc. Yeah, Worf did. And Gene Roddenberry didn't consider Worf a member of the cast. He was always a recurring secondary character. It wasn't until the 3rd season and episodes like Sins of the Father that Worf was really elevated, even though you could tell he was a star even in episodes like Heart of Glory. Royston S. Bailey said, are there any new or young writers that could do Trek justice? I don't know. I think there's always people out there that can do something justice. It's just, who are they? I mean, I hope that there are people out there. I think the real problem is, and you see it reflected, you've seen it reflected in Rings of Power, you've seen it reflected in modern Star Trek shows like Discovery and Strange New Worlds. Lower Decks is different, came from a different place. But I really think that there is a lot of the TV writers that are writing television today are people that grew up watching TV and movies and don't have enough of a literary background. You know, people have criticized me to say that I shouldn't go after the writers. I shouldn't be as hard on them as I am. But I would say, yeah, I am going to be hard on these writers because there is 60 years of great genre writing beginning all the way back. I mean, not just the shows people remember, but let's just talk about Twilight Zone. Twilight Zone began in 1959. You know, Twilight Zone went from 59 to 64. The original Star Trek series started in 66. And in the later 60s, you had Patrick McGowan's The Prisoner. That is not perfect, but if you look at the quality of this writing, and now we're getting people that grew up watching Buffy and Angel, and they wear their influences on their sleeve. I mean, it's one thing to do a musical episode. You want to do your Once More with Feeling, but now you're going to go do a Muppet episode because Angel did? First of all, those kinds of episodes don't... When you have a Klingon boy band in that musical episode, look, you know these people know nothing about the show they're writing because it wasn't the Klingons singing opera. It was, I mean, that was just, it's, you know, here's the thing. You know through the quality of the writing that these people don't know the show they're writing about, nor do they know good science fiction. And it's insulting to think that somebody's spending millions of dollars an episode on this swill that they're writing. And I use swill because it is truly worthless. Season 3 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds is an embarrassment of epic proportions, especially when it's the 10 episodes a season. That's what they're giving us now, and all of them are kind of a goof. None of them made any sense, and they're certainly not literary in nature, and they keep ripping off TOS episodes badly. Well, I don't know what to write, so I'm just going to go and steal a character or two, or a whole race from the original series, but I'm not going to do anything interesting with it. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating to watch, especially when Next Generation has many more episodes, and they're not even going back. And anyway, I don't want to just destroy Strange New Worlds, even though it is god awful. Make no mistake. Hey, if you like it, that's fine. It can be a diversion, but I don't think that there's anything going on in Star Trek Strange New Worlds that's going to have you pondering it weeks, years, or even decades later. But that could be me. Griff Nizzle sends in a $20 super chat. That's very nice of you. 40 years I've wanted to know the answer to this question. Why did the Reliant miss that torpedo shot before the Enterprise entered the Mutara Nebula? People keep saying warning shot, but why bother with a warning shot? Well, I would say that they missed because they weren't combat veterans. You know, they've been stuck on a planet. You just have to. I don't think it was a warning shot. I think that they just missed. Remember, Khan's thinking was two-dimensional. They were not used to three-dimensional space combat. They were not used to using their targeting computers. They were not used to any of those things. So I don't think it was a warning shot. I think they just missed. Joe Panor asks, will you have Paul on after the trial? Hope it goes in his favor. We'll see. I'd love to have Paul come on. I love Paul. He's been on this channel before. I hopefully will have him on after the trial. Royston S. Bailey says the zenith of Western civilization was from the Beatles to the Next Generation. That you could be right about that, but I think that there's been good stuff too. I mean, I think that you have to ask yourself what was happening between the Beatles and TNG. I would say that there was a lot of good culture all throughout the 20th century. Royston S. Bailey says Data dressing down Worf was a great scene. That is a great scene. That's classic Star Trek. And it's the question, are we still friends? It's a great moment. Royston S. Bailey says, thank you for all you've done for Star Trek. Live long and prosper. Well, thank you, Royston. I appreciate that. 1001 Johnny says Ultraman had writers and directors from 40 years ago return. I didn't know that. That's interesting. I don't know if that's gonna. Well, maybe it was a good thing for Ultraman. I don't know if it's a good thing always, but hey, maybe it is. I don't know. We shall see. Or you'd have to tell me, is it a good thing? Because I don't know if it is. I'm just gonna check and see if there's any tips. And before I read an article, I've got a letter. I've got a letter that I want to read, and it's a good letter, and I think you're going to like it. Anonymous says, I'm not naming names, but there's a guy who goes, good kid from X country, by the way. Good X kid, by the way. Then in the next breath will say to people who isn't even his or her unspecified fellow countrymen, how dare you show any national awareness, you pieces of shit. I don't know exactly. A good kid from X country, by the way. I think I know who you're talking about. But I don't know quite what that means. Just come out and say it. Boink boink on the head Boink Boink. That's, of course, an episode to the first season TOS episode, Miri. Happy birthday, RMB. Keep it going. I love that. So there we go. That's good. But yeah, I think I know who you're talking about, but I don't know what you're making a statement, but I don't know what you want me to how to answer that one. 1001 Johnny celebrates 28 months of membership as well. I wanted to honor that. Captain Robert April says he celebrates 38 months of membership. His months of membership represent the years that TNG is old. Dan Crane says, or he celebrates 8 months of membership. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. This is actually a really, let's see, I got a couple of letters that I want to read. Hang on, because one is a pissed off letter that I think is a good letter. And let me I pulled it up already. Here it is. This is an episode dealing with the Mandalorian and Grogu. And this comes in from Cult Cinema 83. And it was written on September 23rd. Hello, Rob. Well, today is another one of those days where I'm going to take you to task. Only this time it's going to be different. You and I often disagree on many things, but yesterday on the John Campea show, both you and John said a lot of things that sit right with me, and this is a lot of the things that I guess don't sit right with me, and this is the first time where I'm actually angry at you, and this will be the first time I will call you an old man shouting at clouds. It is, of course, Star Wars related. Now, you know about my feelings about Andor, in which my opinion was a mistake for the brand, in my opinion was a mistake for the brand. Hey, here's an idea. Let's take the fun out of Star Wars and introduce something like Grape, something the franchises never did. Oh, and by the way, we are the only ones that can do that because I can't have swearing in Star Trek. The hypocrisy in that statement I can't even measure. Anyway, after the abomination that I call Andor went away, I saw Star Wars Celebration, and I hadn't been this excited for Star Wars in a long time. Most of all, The Mandalorian and Grogu. However, you and John completely obliterated my hype for that movie. My excitement is no longer there. By the way, this idea that no one is excited for the Maul animated show is BS as well. I'm just saying. Let me explain something that I don't think you and John really grasp. As movie pundits, you have huge power. It is often people like you that create, control, and guide the conversation within fandoms. More often than not, they are building their excitement based on your feedback, and your words matter. So I want to ask you, are you just beyond this stuff age-wise, or are you unable to accept change? Because it's like Jonathan said, this trailer gave me and others like me, a Mandalorian fan, exactly what was promised, which is frickin' the Mandalorian and Grogu on an adventure. Wake up call, not everything has to be on the level of The Empire Strikes Back, nor should it have to be. Well, first of all, I would say to you, why not? Not every piece of Star Trek content is going to be the equivalent of the original series, and it is an unfair and unrealistic demand from my point of view. Why does it, The Mandalorian and Grogu, have to be anything other than what it is? And don't give me this excuse or notion again of I was there on day one when Star Wars premiered in the cinema, so what do you know? Just because you experienced something from the day it first appeared doesn't make you a bigger or more sophisticated fan than I am. I wish you would use the phrase that I always use. Ranting is easy, loving is hard. I was so excited for this movie, and all you and John did was bring fans like me down over something that is only a freaking teaser. This fandom is toxic enough without you and John feeling the need to add to that narrative. Anyway, I really had to get this off my chest because this was really bothering me. Greetings from Holland, Cult Cinema 83. Well, First of all, Cult Cinema, I think that's a good article. I mean, a good letter. And there's a lot of very valid things that you're bringing up and that you rightfully so should bring up. Now, here's the thing. I think that, like, I'm going to go back and say for a long time, Star Wars mostly existed as 3 movies. Certainly in 1977 to 1980, it existed as one movie that changed culture and changed filmmaking forever. Then in 1980 to 1983, Star Wars existed as 2 movies. It was Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. Then in 1983, when Return of the Jedi came out, it was 3 movies. And in that period of time, we got little trifles like the holiday special, the Ewok Adventure, those 2 movies, Caravan of Courage. Then we had the Droids TV show. But basically, Star Wars proper was Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. And those are what influenced pop culture, and those are the things that Star Wars became. Now, of course, during that time, you also had the first Star Wars novel, the Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and then you had the 3 the Han Solo novels, like Han Solo at Star's End. Then you had the 3 Lando Calrissian novels, Lando Calrissian, The Flame Wind of Ocean, Lando Calrissian and the Mind Harp of Sharu, and that was it. But Star Wars, it was just those 3 movies. Now, those 3 movies were epic. They were these epic things that when you went to see them, they promised, even though as everyone knows, I'm not a fan of Return of the Jedi, but they gave us spectacle, and they gave us everything you went to the movies for. Big, widescreen, action, adventure, science fiction, fantasy, taking you to worlds. I mean, everybody's imagination was fired up. Those movies changed cinema history. They changed the way effects were made. They changed everything, really. And that's how Star Wars began. And ever since, I would maintain that really Star Wars was at its peak in Star Wars and Empire, and everything else has been a slide down into something that isn't as great. But I won't argue that point right now. The thing is, you can't expect me, when Star Wars has become the Mandalorian and Grogu was fun in its first 2 seasons. Sometimes it reached, that Bill Burr episode of The Mandalorian reached heights that I didn't think that The Mandalorian would ever reach. But even The Mandalorian in its conception was not shooting very high. It was a fairly simple show, and it wouldn't have been out of place on Saturday morning TV. I mean, it's hardly any great shakes. It wasn't changing anybody's. See, the thing is, Star Wars has never really evolved. And I would say, like you say, that the Andor is out of place. I would say Andor is the evolution that Star Wars needed to continue on as a viable franchise that had something to say to anybody. Suddenly, Star Wars inadvertently made probably one of the most relevant TV shows of the 21st century. And it was truly made by very gifted people, and it elevated the entire franchise. Now, what you're saying in your own letter is that you're not looking for that. You're looking for escapist entertainment, and that's fine. But how much more escapist entertainment are you willing to watch that's the same over and over again? I'd say the problem with The Mandalorian and Grogu, which, is fine, but I would say, from my experience, look at the difference between Star Trek, the TV series in the 60s, TOS, and Star Trek, the motion picture. The scope, the ideas, the way characters related to each other, very, very different. No one, even the people that don't like Star Trek, the motion picture, although most of them have come around, especially with the new 4K restoration, even with Star Trek, the motion picture, nobody would say to you that it didn't feel like it was a big screen epic or a big screen adventure. Whereas The Mandalorian and Grogu looks like, well, if I wanted to use something that's analogous to this, the Batman movie from 1966, or no, I don't know, is it 66? The movie itself, but with Catwoman, Penguin, Riddler, and Joker in it. The feature film version of the Batman TV show is the closest thing. I mean, it looks like a movie, and it also has more exterior stuff and on location shooting. But I would say that the problem with The Mandalorian and Grogu is it looks like the TV show. And it doesn't look like a movie. And we haven't had a Star Wars movie now. We're going to get that movie 7 years after the last Star Wars movie came out. And why am I supposed to be excited for? I don't believe what I saw in that trailer. Why should I go to the movie theater and see it? Now, you might be excited about a Mandalorian and Grogu movie, but the only thing that excites me about it is if they take the concept of the Mandalorian and Grogu and elevate it. You are taking a TV show and putting it in a movie theater, but it looks just like the TV show. It's not my fault. The filmmakers I think, are obligated to give us something. I mean, look, they're already shooting the 2:35 or 2:39 aspect ratio, so getting it in a wider aspect ratio doesn't change anything. It looks just like the TV show. So why am I going to go pay a premium for something I might as well watch on Disney Plus when it finally shows up there? I'm not excited about a Mandalorian and Grogu movie. I don't care what story they're going to tell me. It's a story that is not going to add to my, I would assume, based on that trailer, I don't think I'm going to learn anything more about the Mandalorian and Grogu that I don't already know. And unfortunately, the third season of Mandalorian and Grogu was such a disappointment that I don't really care. So I don't mean, because I say that, it shouldn't have any, you guys might, I mean, I understand what you're saying, that I don't think that we're taste makers. We're just opining on what we think. But the fact is, you know this is true. Now, I'm not going to take away the fact that you're excited about it, but you can't tell me that you're excited about watching something you've seen on television, but now you have to get up and go see it in a movie theater and pay $20 to see it, when you're already paying how much a month to see Mandalorian and Grogu? I mean, they've got to give you something that is significantly different than what you're getting on TV. Otherwise, why bother? This is an easy, and as far as the Star Wars franchise is concerned, the one thing about Andor is everybody who worked on Andor tried their best. Dan Gilroy won an Emmy for writing. The people that made that show put everything they knew into it. You know, you had Tony Gilroy said, I've been studying revolutions and the fall of societies and rebellions my whole life. And I was able to take everything that I've studied from a scholarly point of view and put it where it belongs, in an allegorical action adventure science fiction show. That's everything that was in Andor, you put it in a show, a Star Wars show like that. That's exactly what speculative fiction does. That's the best thing it can do. And while it might not have as much fun for you, you can't deny, I mean, by you saying that Andor is, it's not trash, history has judged Andor. And I would say that when history judges something, meaning the whether you like Andor or not, the world at large has told you that Andor is good. You might not like it, but Andor is now passed into the realm of objectively good, not subjectively good, because history has deemed it so. Now, I would say that, and I do believe, you know, the everything is subjective. No. People's opinions are subjective. But there are certain things that aren't. And whether you recognize them as being great or not is immaterial to the fact that something is, in fact, great. And I would say that history and time is always, I mean, things fall out of favor, but no one's ever going to say that the Mona Lisa is a bad painting. You know, they might not like it, but, you know, we don't have to like it or not. Hamlet, no one's ever going to say Hamlet is a piece of hackery. You know, it is objectively one of the greatest plays ever written. And I don't think that anyone, you know, there are groups of people on this planet right now who, under their laws that they would like to impose on the rest of us, they would get rid of most of the great works of art in modern history because their belief system says that's okay. I disagree. I think any belief system that says you have to destroy something like the Mona Lisa or that it's okay is a belief system that does not belong in the universe. Because remember, if you think about it, all works of art, every single painting that's been preserved, the only place in the entire universe that painting exists. And I don't want to get into multiple worlds or physics or theories or all that, but remember, the only place in the entire infinitude of the universe where the Mona Lisa exists and all the other works of art exist are on this planet, which makes works of art more important because also they outlive their creators. They outlive the human beings that made them. They're the most important things on our planet. Artwork, and if you come from a belief system that thinks that destroying such works is okay, fuck your belief system, and fuck you too. You have no place in our modern civilization. And we talked about moral relativism. I'm happy to put my foot down and say, if that's your jam, if you want to get rid of literature, you want to get rid of art, it's time to get rid of fucking you. Because you're making a decision that you don't have the right to make. The universe has that right. And if the sun wants to explode and destroy all the works of art humanity ever made, fine. But if humanity, if there are groups of people on this planet that would rampage through the Louvre and destroy everything in there, we've already seen groups of people blow up thousands of year-old statues in various parts of the world, and you know what I'm talking about. Time for them to go. I don't care what the fuck they believe, because that to me is where there's no moral relativism for me. If you were, so I would say, going back to Andor, you might not like Andor, but that doesn't mean Andor shouldn't exist. And I think that the Mandalorian and Grogu is and look, I haven't seen the movie, and I'll be the first person to admit if it's good, but I think it's weak sauce. I think it is creatively bankrupt to make a Mandalorian movie, and they're doing it because they couldn't manage to do anything better. And I think because of the various pressures on our business, or the entertainment business now, and I think that in a world that is driven by analytics, that's anti-art. That means you only have to create something that has already been created, that you already know people like. We're moving into a realm where human beings are going to become secondary to the gods of AI, the gods of analytics, the gods of all these things. And we're going to have to figure out how to maintain our humanity in the wake of all this. Because, if the people aren't going to spend the money to make something new, that can't be, if AI can't decide whether or not we should want to see it or if it's going to get made, who wants to live in that world? Whatever happened to creation for its own sake? But things are too expensive now. And I would say that if we let analytics define things, if we let whatever people are watching on Netflix, define what's going to get made, I think we're going to live in a pretty boring civilization. But I would say this, The Mandalorian and Grogu to me is a disappointment because it shows a lack of creativity on the part of the people that own the Star Wars franchise. I'm not saying it's not going to be good. I'm just saying what a disappointment, especially coming on the heels of Andor. As a matter of fact, until somebody tells me something different, there's nothing coming out in the Star Wars universe. Hey, I hope Starfighter is great. I really do. But even the concept behind it isn't very interesting to me. I hope it's good. I really do. But now I've got to the point in my life where all of these franchises, they don't even have the top people working on them anymore. You don't even have, God, Peter S. Beagle, who's a great novelist, who wrote The Last Unicorn, who wrote A Wonderful Story, A Fine and Private Place, came up with a story for Sarek. Where are those people? Why is it that we don't have science fiction writers writing Star Trek stories? Why is the writing staff churning out the garbage it's turning out? Why is Star Trek not attracting the best writers in the business? I don't know. I don't understand. And the thing is, we should have a show that's compelling, that should get people to talk, conversations, whatever. It's just disappointing to see what our great franchises are giving us. And the same thing is true of all these things. I find it just really, really disappointing. And I think that's where everybody's at. People want great stories well told. It doesn't matter how much they cost. If you could do a Star Wars story with 2 people in a room, I'd watch it. I still don't understand what the Sith want. Why do they bother trying to take over the galaxy? What are they going to do when they have it? You know, I've always joked about this, but I'm like, you know, I've always loved stories that I love the devil as an antagonist. I love possession stories. The Exorcist is my favorite horror film. But the idea that if the devil actually came to Earth and captured the planet and subjugated us, well, then what? What's the devil going to do next week? Fix everyone's plumbing? I mean, once the devil wins, where do you go? You wait for some uprising? I don't know. But that's the problem with stories about, you know, the ultimate evil. If the ultimate evil wins, there's no other story to tell. But then if the ultimate evil wins, then what is the ultimate evil going to do? I mean, to be honest, I've always wanted to see a sequel to Halloween 3 once half the kids in America are killed by Conal Cochran and his plot. Then what? A lot of sad parents. But it would have been interesting to see what the world looks like when a warlock pulls off that many murders. The genocide of America's children. But then again, where do you go with that? It's hard. It's hard to come up with good storytelling. It's hard to come up with a good Star Wars story because not every franchise needs to continue on. We need new franchises. I mean, just because something made money, it's like we have these IPs. But the thing is, if you're going to continue an IP, you should really have the best ideas for that IP to move forward. Otherwise, you fail. Star Trek is a failing IP. There's been very little, and I'll even say this, as much as I liked Picard Season 3, I liked it because I like where they took the legacy characters from TNG. It was really interesting. It was like a movie like The Professionals. You see all these old gunfighters come back, and it's interesting to see where they're at in their lives. I thought with the TNG characters, you might not have liked all the machinations or even the story that was being told, but it was really cool seeing these old friends get back together. I liked seeing that Riker and Troy were dealing with the death of his son, and that Riker he was pretty much had given up, but then found in the cosmos where he belongs, he found a reason to live. I love that idea. I love the fact that Geordi had 2 daughters and was trying to be a father to them. I thought that was great. You know, I thought Data's story was compelling. I never believed how they set up Picard, but I love seeing Picard and Riker go off together. The way they set up, it was not Picard, it was Patrick Stewart. The only way they could do it is because Patrick Stewart, the only way they can get him to come back is he had to weigh in and say, I wanted this to be about me, Patrick Stewart, not Jean-Luc Picard, because Patrick Stewart doesn't know anything about Jean-Luc Picard. He doesn't think about Jean-Luc Picard. He memorizes the lines on a piece of paper, but he's not following the life of Captain Picard the way we do. Anyway, I don't know if I'm just rambling, but it's a good article or a good letter that you wrote, so thank you for that. But I don't think that John and I are obligated to hold our tongues to make other people. I appreciate you've instilled us with this much power. I that's very nice of you, but we're not the only people that think that. I think that the real question that you should be asking yourself is, why does Disney, a publicly held corporation with presumably the best minds in the country to work on this stuff, why is it that The Mandalorian and Grogu is the best they could do after 7 years? And we're following that up with a movie called Starfighter, which I would imagine is not very different from The Mandalorian and Grogu. In fact, you've got a Starfighter who apparently, by what we know, has to take a kid to somewhere, take a Force-sensitive Jedi's kid somewhere else. I mean, these are the stories that we're getting. I hope it's good. I want these things to be good. I really do. But they're not exactly the most creatively, how do I get excited about this stuff? Maybe we shouldn't anymore. I don't know. I have another letter to follow that up with. Let me just check and see. I've got some more tips. Oh, this is a good one. So, 1001 Johnny says, I will recommend those Ultraman episodes to you, Rob, eventually. They're entertaining for sure, though. I'm glad about that. Mike Gallagher has been a member of the channel for 19 months. Claudius, our friend Claudius, is back. Okay, Rob, longtime listener opinion. Authenticity in fiction and podcasts requires a level of expertise to thoughtfully and constructively illustrate social and political ideas in drama. I absolutely agree with that. unless we're talking about Skyfall. But I agree with that. 1001 Johnny says, the letter writer is right. Everything can't be the greatest of all time. I'm actually looking forward to Mando. It doesn't have to be the greatest of all time, but it has to give you something new and different. If you're watching a TV show, you're watching a TV show on streaming. If I'm going to go to the theater, you've got to give me a Mandalorian and Grogu story that's worth going to the theater for. Now, most people might be, hey, if you're excited about it, I don't want to take that away from you. But what is going to be in that movie that they haven't given us on the TV show? And I know the answer is, well, Rob, you'll have to see it in the theater. I know. I will have to see it in the theater. But I just think that a Mandalorian and Grogu movie, everything we saw in that trailer, we have seen before. Okay, we might not have seen a hut in a coliseum, but Grogu uses his force power to try and get food, and Sigourney Weaver stops it. That's in the trailer. We've seen that before. Show me something in a trailer that Grogu hasn't done. What is something interesting? Like if you're gonna get me interested in the Mandalorian and Grogu, put a lightsaber in Grogu's hand for the first time. Or was it the first time? Maybe you had one in his hand before. I don't know. But show me something I haven't seen before. That trailer was just more of the same. I'm like, yawn. And I'm happy that everybody's excited about a Mandalorian movie. I think that's great. I'm not going to tell you not to be excited about it. I'm just saying that I don't know. Like, why are you excited about seeing something you've seen 3 seasons of? And the 3rd season was not good. MTH says, Rob, your thoughts on Tilly Norwood. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Tilly Norwood is an art project that has been meant to start conversations. And Tilly Norwood is an AI-generated character. There's an AI-generated short film about her. And it came out that an artist created her as a performance piece. She was going to be, or she is, the first AI-generated actress. And this person who created Tilly Norwood came out and was talking about it, how it is an art piece. And the idea was that agencies, Tilly Norwood would be assigned, like people are saying, she's the new Scarlett Johansson, and she's available for talent agencies to sign. I think at first people took it seriously, but it came out today that Tilly Norwood was going to be the first AI generated artist, but it was an art piece. It was meant to start discussion. It certainly did, and a lot of people were all up in arms about it, and a lot of people took it seriously, like as if a talent agency is going to sign an actual AI. I mean, maybe they will. But what you're doing is you're not signing an AI-generated character. You're signing the company and all the people behind that character. So it's definitely an interesting. It's definitely an interesting idea, but I don't think anyone has to worry about her replacing Scarlett Johansson anytime soon. 1001 Johnny goes on to say, I don't know. Could you, Rob, articulate this further? As I'm not sure how to put this into words, but the idea would be that the alien with superior strength and power is able to intellectually challenge. Wait a second. Hang on. I have to start. Sorry. This cold is getting to me now. I don't know. Could you, Rob, articulate this any further? As I'm not sure how to put this into words. But the idea would be that the alien with superior strength and power is able to intellectually challenge modern ideas of human rights. What makes it a right? Well, and then I think that's what you're saying. I mean, that's what. Here's the thing. The great thing about science fiction, fantasy, and horror is you can ask that question. Like, for instance, I'll give you a hypothetical. Let's say disclosure happens, and we discover that there has been an alien race that has been observing us for a long time. And they have passed judgment on us. And they're part of a vast interstellar community of intellect. And they just say that we've observed you for a long time, and we have decided that, excuse me, we have to eliminate you from the universe. There's nothing we can do. We could plead our case, but they've already decided. There's no case to plead. They can say, well, we've looked at the last 5,000 years of human history, and you have never demonstrated any different. Your technological advancements have not made you any wiser. You know, you're still killing each other. You Sudan, Congo, half of Africa is full of murderers, just like the rest of the world. And you've got people that believe in one God image killing other people that believe in a different God image. And both of your God images are wrong, by the way. And you're killing each other over them. And you don't even know if they're true or not. I mean, we have no defense against that. Now, my defense, what I would say, that's when I would point to our stories and our artwork and the Great Pyramids and Notre Dame and the Taj Mahal. You know, I would say that we were able to construct things that have outlived the people that made them, that have existed, that can be pondered over by you, and hopefully that you can glean some meaning out of who we are. And maybe there's hope there. Maybe that would be something, but that's something I would point to. But if we don't value ourselves, how can we expect to be valued by a superior intellect? I mean, that's a really interesting science fiction story. That makes people ponder, well, why should they spare us? You know, and that was Star Trek butted up against that, you know. Quality of mercy. In the very first episode with the Gorn in the original series, Kirk shows a quality of mercy, and an alien says, wow, we didn't know you had that. Maybe that means you are worth sparing. Something as simple as that. But I think it's not going to be as easy if we're being judged by a superior intellect, but that's what a science fiction story can do. And then a great science fiction story is something that we then ponder. You know, should humanity survive? I mean, I was talking about this I love the mid-'80s Twilight Zone. It's not perfect. It's very different than the original Twilight Zone, but there's a great episode called A Small Talent for War. And this alien race comes down to Earth, and you find out that the alien race seeded Earth, you know, to see where we're going to go. And they're like, but you guys suck. You know, you haven't done what we wanted you to do, and we're gonna destroy you. They go to the United Nations, and you guys are a mess. And the United Nations, the people of the United Nations. By the way, this episode is like 10 minutes long. It's called The Small Talent for War. You can watch it on YouTube, but I'm going to spoil the shit out of it right now. So in this episode, humanity has like they get 24 hours to figure it out. So the entire UN is figuring stuff out for 24 hours before the alien comes back, and the aliens come back, and it's, you know, Lex Luthor's father, John. He's such a great character actor. Anyway, he plays the alien. So the United Nations, all the nations of the world, spend 24 hours. They all-nighter. They pull an all-nighter, and they come down, and they're like, "Here it is. Here's a treaty. The entire world, for the very first time, is at peace. Here you go." And the alien just starts laughing. And he goes, "No, you and the alien's like, you guys are so funny. You don't understand. We put you here to learn to be warriors. And you are middling warriors, and this idea of peace, and that's not what you're here for. You were supposed to be the greatest warriors of all." And that's why the episode's called The Small Talent for War. But you failed. You all failed. And of course, that's the end of the episode. You know that they're going to wipe humanity out. And the episode ends with all their ships coming down to the city. Not great effects, video-generated effects, but it's great. You should go look at it. A Small Talent for War, The Twilight Zone. Good stuff. But 1001 Johnny says, The Mandalorian came from one fellow, didn't it? Jon Favreau. Yeah, he wanted to do a film since season 1, but Disney kept meddling after season 2. So we got Fett and season 3 as padding. This should be seen as a win that he fought and won for this film. Yeah, you can look at it that way. I mean, I get that that's what Jon Favreau wanted to do, and I'm happy for him. You know, I'm happy that a creator, but the fact is, after seeing the Book of Boba Fett, which has destroyed a beloved character since The Empire Strikes Back, that show was awful. That was an awful, especially since how they introduced Fett and the Mandalorian. I mean, I've never seen, that was an abomination. I mean, especially because, look, you know, if you look at science fiction shows like Star Trek, they look at other things. Like you want to do a submarine show. You're looking at Run Silent, Run Deep or something, and you make Balance of Terror. A Boba Fett show should have looked at the great crime thrillers like The Godfather, like Scarface, like King of New York, like Goodfellas, like Casino. And if you had Boba Fett, who was he was in everyone's employ, the Hutts leave a vacuum, and he just comes and decides he wants to take over the criminal empire of the Hutts. You could have done a kick-ass, awesome show that would have been, but they made it, it's like this, when you have Boba Fett following a robot around a kitchen and finally catching him by the neck going, I am Boba Fett. I mean, what the hell are you looking at? This was terrible. It was terrible. Obi-Wan Kenobi had to shoehorn Princess Leia in there. I mean, these shows, I don't need to relitigate this stuff. It's self-apparent. So, you know, that's I don't know. Part 1 and part 2. That's I see what you're saying. So 1001 Johnny sent an idea in. Yeah, sometimes things, depending on where they come from, they have to go through servers and they don't come through. So 1001 Johnny says, I get it. He says, Rob, here's a story idea for a Twilight Zone episode. An alien agent like Klaatu appears to the United States and challenges the Declaration of Independence and the idea that inalienable rights is indeed inalienable. Let me go. I don't know. Could you, Rob, articulate this further? I'm not sure how to put this into words. But the idea would be that the alien with superior strength of power is able to intellectually challenge modern ideas of human rights. What makes it a right? Oh, that's what you're saying. Well, you know, I mean, they even addressed that in Star Trek VI. When the Klingons, like, Azet Bohr says, inalienable. She says that. The very sound of it makes it racist, you know, that I mean, you could say that, but here's the thing. Our entire belief system is only based on what we know of our lives right here on Earth. And we have such a small understanding of the universe that if an alien race shows up here on Earth, first of all, if an alien race were to show up, all of our belief systems are out the window. All of our religion is gone. All of our beliefs in physics or where we would have to start all over again, especially what does this alien look like? Is it humanoid, or does it look totally different? Our even understanding of what life would look like is we only know what we've seen on this planet. What if we ran into, say, a silicon life form, or like Rocky in Project Hail Mary? What happens if a silicon life form like the Horta? I mean, what if there's a life form like the Medusans in Star Trek? They're so ugly or they're so distasteful to look at, we can't even look at them without being driven mad. I mean, we don't even know what that's like. We can only imagine things the way we can imagine them because we've never seen something that we couldn't imagine. But it's very possible that we might meet an alien life form that's so very alien that we can't even relate to it on any level. What happens then? And yeah, when the thing is, our Bill of Rights, if you want to challenge our Bill of Rights, how would they even apply to an alien race that might not even I mean, if you look at what I really like about the three-body problem is the Trisolarans, the Santi, they're when they were destroyed, their civilization would be destroyed, and they have to come back and rebuild everything. We don't even know. We have a history. We've been able to progress, and there's that great scene. It was great in the Netflix series when she's questioning the two characters. Well, how long did it take you to start agriculture? How long did it take you to get to nuclear power and the computer and all of that? And we had it relatively easy compared to the Trisolarans, the Santis. So that's why, they have to take away our science and everything. I mean, it's because by the time they got to Earth in 400 years, we'd be way ahead of them. So the way we defeat you is to get rid of your science. I mean, it was very, very interesting. But, I think that's a great idea for a Twilight Zone episode, but there's no reason to think that anything that we've created on this planet would ever apply to an alien race. Like, what happens if an alien race comes down and knows that our vision of what God is wrong? Definitively knows it. Now, there would be human beings saying, I have faith. But if this alien race came down and said, no, but you're wrong. Or they could explain exactly how life originated on this planet. And they could explain to us why we believe what we believe. And they definitively prove that all of our religious belief is hooey. What would that do to our culture? What if tomorrow you'd have people that would still believe? Because human beings are great like that. Even if we had definitive proof that it wasn't true. That the aliens would tell us that. And what's going to happen if we do meet aliens? What happens if they don't have a Messiah story? And we're going to not like them. we will find a way to have a problem with the aliens. They don't believe in God. They don't believe in the prophet. They don't believe in anything that we believe in, so fuck them. That's going to be our first impulse. And how do we get over that? Especially with people that are technologically more advanced than we are. I mean, if you think about, there's so many reasons science fiction tells us a story of like, I'm sure that the house that I'm in right now, actually the garage I'm in right now, is sitting above, I've seen, there must be billions of ants because we're close to the desert. We have a kind of a lush, the Redlands is lush. So the ecosystem here is, there are billions of insects. There's a whole ecosystem of creatures out there, and there's some form of intelligence because they know what they're doing to survive. And I'm surrounded by alien life that's smart. Not as smart as me, but it's like we don't even consider that. I mean, if we found a planet that had as much stuff on it alive as exists in my yard, we would think we made the greatest discovery ever because it wouldn't be on Earth. But we don't even consider the vast the vast life all over this planet. We will indiscriminately, we'll eat it, we'll kill it, we'll destroy it. We think we're better than all of it. What if aliens came down and said, your biggest problem, what you've done on your planet? You don't realize, that's why I love Star Trek 6, or Star Trek 4. All those big animals that you've been killing in Africa with all the tusks, you've been killing them for the ivory. What you don't understand is those creatures are actually the brain cells. I'm just throwing out a thing I'm making up as I'm talking. The brain cells of your planet, the rhinoceroses, the elephants, the giraffes, all of those creatures. You ever wonder why there's so many of those creatures in Africa? Because basically your planet is alive, which you don't know, but it's alive. And these animals are part of the brain, part of the nervous system of your planet. And all you people have been doing is killing them. You guys are the dumbest motherfuckers in the universe. You have literally been taking away the intellect of your planet. And you know what? Your planet cried out. And our planet heard your planet cry out. And your planet has asked us to show up here and get rid of the only thing that is disturbing the balance of this planet that evolved to be perfectly balanced. But you guys weren't even a problem up until the last, 500 years. Now you're a real problem, and you are actually interfering. The big life form on your planet is the planet. The planet itself is alive, and it asked our planet to come get us and say, you got to get rid of these human beings. I mean, we don't even know if that's true or not. I mean, I just made it up. It's a little far-fetched, but we don't know. The point is, we're so far up our own asses that we can barely, we have, and the Mandalorian and Grogu shows how far up our own asses we are. We're not even thinking anytime. It's maddening. It's just maddening. So, I mean, while the Mandalorian and Grogu could be good, is it what we need? I don't even know. I'm rambling because I don't feel that well. But anyway, I'm going to read another letter. I got another letter to read. And this one comes from Damo. And it's about alien Earth. I probably should drink some more water. Hi, Rob. I hope you are well. I've been enjoying your show as always. I just wanted to throw in my own observations regarding alien Earth now that it has blissfully ended. Like so many other Alien fans, like so many other Alien fans, I was so looking forward to this show. The pedigree attached to it, along with the budget, suggested it could be an amazing experience. The teasers look good. The premise was very intriguing. All signs pointed to something that could be potentially great. Oh my word, was I wrong. Now, episodes 1 and 2 released together had real potential. I let some of the more stupid moments wash over me to start with. After all, we got to get the setup going. We need characters to get where they need to be for the story to unfold. Then came the flashback episode on the Maginot. I think I watched that episode with my lower jaw on my chest, truly marveling at how stupid the characters were and brain dead the decisions they were making. And subsequent episodes, it just got worse. Like a fool, I kept watching. As I said before, the premise was intriguing. The idea is intriguing. Hope kept me going. Hope it would get better. Hope that it was at least going somewhere. But no. Like with all recent Alien media, the xenomorph itself had become a side character in its own franchise, and we were now falling back on a trope introduced by the man who introduced us to the alien in the first place, Ridley Scott. He has decided somehow to become the guardian of this franchise since Prometheus, steering it forward to places that have, in my opinion, ruined the mythos. It has become a franchise about what it means to be human, about genetics and replicants, about creations turning on their creators, hybrids, newborns. Interesting, for sure, but as Nerdrotic has pointed out, more like a Blade Runner show than an Alien one, surely. Maybe he has shoehorned these elements into Alien simply because it is more commercially viable? Who knows? But now, when I see his name attached to anything Alien, a cold shiver runs down my spine. Imagine that. One of the greatest directors ever, and I cringe when he gets his mitts on Alien. And then we come to Noah Hawley. He seems to have been worshiping at the altar of Ridley, as all of his ideas seem to have come directly from him. Between Prometheus, Covenant, and Romulus, the formula for Alien Earth was all there, mixed in, now given the room to breathe and grow. I started to think around episode 5 that perhaps Hawley was trolling us. That this whole show and the foolish characters in it was his commentary on what the future was going to look like based on what's happening in the world of today. The selfish, introverted, arrogant, no common sense, technologically dependent generations that we're producing. But I saw no evidence in the show to tell me if this was the case. No dialogue, no wink at the camera, not even any interviews with Hawley himself saying this was so. As a result, I can only assume everything in this show was on purpose. I shuddered at the last episode, the cliffhanger promising yet more time in the company of these relentless idiots. As far as I was concerned, it promised only another nail in the coffin of this Alien franchise. I'm interested in your thoughts. All the best, Damo. A good letter. Now, before I have to say I'm a huge Noah Hawley fan. You know, I really like what he did with Legion. I never expected to see an X-Men show like that on TV. And obviously what he did with Fargo was pretty excellent. But I have to agree with you. Alien's one of my favorite movies. I would dare say that Alien is a perfect film. And one of the things that I love, there are two things that I think really set Alien apart. And one I'm going to say is the verisimilitude of it all. Nobody had ever seen a movie like that. Again, in the wake of Star Wars, it came out 2 years after Star Wars, 1979, from the same studio, 20th Century Fox. And what it presented to us was a whole lived-in future world where we believe there are giant. We don't even know what the Nostromo is, a commercial towing vehicle. It's towing basically this gigantic these giant cathedrals in space. So it was immediately evocative of the churches that were now in the universe, in the heavens themselves, being pulled by this really cool ship that was actually supposed to be a tugboat, essentially. And then you had a group of these blue-collar workers. Alien was called, like in France, the title was The Eighth Passenger. It wasn't Alien, it was The Eighth Passenger. But so you have these blue-collar people. Very relatable. We understand who these people are right away. They're concerned about the bonus situation. But the one thing about these characters was they were smart. Brett and Parker, they knew how to fix that goddamn ship. Now, Dallas was a good captain. Sigourney Weaver, very capable. All of these characters knew their jobs. They were workaday people. What they didn't know anything about was, what do you do when you encounter an extraterrestrial, well, at the time, never encountered before? They go through the protocols. They do everything they're told. They have to go down. They rescue the ship. They find a gigantic alien derelict, the likes of which they've never seen. They don't freak out. They're like, well, they do what any people do like that. They're like, I got to get the job done. We got to go find where the signal's coming from. Maybe there's somebody to rescue. But they're not even like, this is an amazing alien craft. I mean, Ash thinks it's amazing, but for the most part, these people have a job to do. It's work a day. We got to go find the signal. Is there somebody to rescue? Can we get the fuck out? Anyway, the thing about Alien is you had these blue-collar workers that were ill-equipped to deal with this alien xenomorph. We all know the story, but what made Alien so interesting is not only is it how realistic it was, but these characters, once the shit hit the fan, and once Kane had this chest burster explode from him, even coming in, Sigourney Weaver's like, why did you break protocol? Why didn't you listen to what I said? Because we don't know that Ash is a robot yet. But everybody in Alien, to the best of their abilities, is smart. They don't have any weapons, but they're able. Parker is able to fabricate cattle prods and motion sensors and flamethrowers. They do as well as they can with what's at hand. They didn't expect to have. There's no weapons on that ship. They certainly didn't expect to find some armored xenomorph like they find it. But what's great about that movie is they have no idea what they're up against, and neither do we. But they do their best. They're just outgunned, and nothing's going to save them. There's nothing they can do. So when you're watching Alien, you're watching these people make the best of a situation. They're as smart as they can be. They do as much as they can, but they have no idea what they're facing. And what they're facing is the existential dread of the cosmic infinitude of what we'll never know. That was what's made Alien so wonderful, is that we're never going to know where this alien derelict spacecraft came from. We're never going to know who the space jockey was. We're never going to know why the space jockey had his chest burster inside of it. Who put those thousands of eggs in there? Lined up perfectly. It's not like somebody dumped them in. They're put in there beautifully, and that ship is huge. Like when you see him descending down, and it's huge, and you see like clearly those alien eggs were going for some whether it's nefarious or not. You have to think it's nefarious. We'll never know, and that was part of it. We'll never know where this stuff was going, and in Aliens is more of a war movie. Still, you now have an alien queen, but that even brings up more questions. How did you get those aliens in that alien derelict back in the last movie? It didn't change things. And even Alien 3, if you watch the assembly cut of Alien 3, the way that the xenomorph clashes with these men and their religious beliefs and all that. There's something interesting about it, especially if you watch. It's not perfect, but it's oppressive. And then you get to the goofiness of Alien Resurrection. But then you start answering questions. And what was interesting is Ridley Scott was combining Blade Runner and Alien together. And one of the great tropes of science fiction is artificial people. How can we extend life? This is some of the oldest science fiction material that's ever been dealt with. All the way back in film, Fritz Lang, 1927, Metropolis, Maria, all of that. We've been dealing with this. Star Trek, Roger Corby creating android bodies so humans can live forever. This is something that Star Trek and many other science fiction franchises have dealt with. Can we live forever by putting human consciousness into android bodies? The problem with all of this is that especially now in Alien Earth, all of these things were done in a very haphazard, unsatisfying way that felt to me as if nobody had ever come across these stories, as if no one had ever watched Ghost in the Shell. No one had ever watched many different Japanese animated films about, or better yet, Pluto. If you haven't watched Pluto on Netflix, please go watch Pluto. It's one of the greatest things I've seen in it's Japanese anime, but go watch it because it's incredible. It's a hard science fiction story about robotics and artificial life or AI, but it's really, really good. But when you're watching this, there's all of these goofy things going on. Like, for instance, if you take kids' consciousness, and you put it inside a machine, I mean, okay, the machine is designed to be like an adult body. But that doesn't mean that a kid is going to feel any different. It's not like you're putting kids... See, the thought process is, I think they thought that, and this is so weird to me, that a machine's a machine. It doesn't matter how you design a machine. But if you take a kid's presence and put it into a machine, it doesn't matter if the machine's an adult machine, what it looks like. It's what it feels like to be in it. And they're controlling whatever the kids are supposed to feel. But what they did was they made these kids suddenly, they're like autistic or developmentally disabled or on the spectrum. Kids aren't stupid. They were all dealing with mortality. And what it would have been really interesting to lean more into is that these kids were all suffering from terminal diseases. And then suddenly they were out of their bodies. They didn't have aches and pains anymore. And what does that mean? How did that change their perspective? And they had all of these interesting things that they could have done that they didn't do for the sake of the plot. And the thing that I really couldn't stand is if you're Boy Cavalier and you have all of this money and you're the head of one of the biggest corporations on Earth, and you know that you're going to get these alien creatures, why do you not have a biolab that has the best scientists in the world? Presumably you could get them. And why isn't your lab monitored 24/7? Every single moment that these extraterrestrial life forms are not monitored, not studied, is a waste. What, you're only going to have people work from 9 to 5 on these creatures? You should have 24-hour-a-day people in the best in the world. They should never be left unattended. There should be all kinds of bright lights. I mean, I'm looking at this going, how is this smart guy acting so stupid around these extraterrestrials? It was maddening. I mean, let's go a little bit more Andromeda strain. I'm with you. There was all these really interesting ideas, but the characters were so dumb, and you're asking me to believe in like, if these kids know, if you know that there's alien life that you've never seen ever before, they certainly, they took it in a very cavalier manner, and I just didn't believe it. And and they just needed that for convenience to let these creatures escape. It was so, they just leave these aliens unattended to do what they do. 'Cause who knows if they're not being, I mean, okay, you're watching them on a view screen. Why wasn't there somebody? And by the way, why wasn't the entire place manned by synthetics? Why are there human beings there at all? Why are there human beings on that island at all? I don't know. I mean, to advance the plot. Why are there, if there's synthetics everywhere, why are there, I mean, I understand on the Maginot they were gone for 65 years. But if you have synthetics like Kirsch, why isn't your entire facility manned by synthetics? Especially to look over alien creatures. I mean, they don't know what the life cycle is of a xenomorph, but why would you ever have meat that could be affected by alien creatures? If you're dealing with any kind of extraterrestrials at all, and you have synths like they have in Alien Earth, why would anybody put human beings anywhere near these creatures? I mean, these ideas are dumb. I mean, you don't put extraterrestrials in the same facility that your billion-dollar synths are in. What do they have to do with each other? Nothing. You would have I mean, look, you go back to for those people who have ever seen it, Robert Wise's movie, The Andromeda Strain, that was based on Michael Crichton, the creator of ER's first novel. And in that book and the movie, there was a thought, the military had a thought that one day there might be some kind of extraterrestrial contamination on Earth. It might come in the form of a meteor. It might come we don't know how it's going to come. But they had built a secret underground facility to deal with this, and it had a nuke inside. If something went wrong, they could blow the whole place up, sterilize the whole site. But this is in a movie that was made in 1971 with a book that came out in the late 60s. And they already came up with the idea that if there's alien life on Earth, we have already constructed a facility, an underground facility, to deal with it. And the Andromeda Strain did this. This is foundational. Okay, if you're not going to read science fiction books, at least you can read or watch, or pardon me, if you're not going to read science fiction novels, at least you can go back and read or watch. There's only like 30 great science fiction movies you need to see that have enough heady concepts that you can deal with. I mean, I would say The Andromeda Strain is certainly one, because Noah Hawley could have used it to watch something like The Man Who Fell to Earth, I think is essential viewing, because how do you deal with, how would an extraterrestrial walk among us? What would happen if an extraterrestrial had to come to Earth for whatever reason to interact with humanity? There's a movie to watch. Blade Runner might be one, but there's probably like 30 movies that have more heady concepts and they deal with them better than they deal with in Alien Earth. I grew up with The Andromeda Strain. I probably saw that movie when I was 8 years old and it freaked the fuck out of me. Or a movie like Phase 4. These movies, I've seen these since I was a kid. And I'm watching Alien Earth going, you guys have extraterrestrial life. And you guys are idiots. Where is your facility to deal with this? If Kid Cavalier knew that the Maginot, or they know that there's a ship that's been traveling through space for 65 years, why hasn't he already built the ultimate extraterrestrial lab to look for, if we knew that there was extraterrestrials, why wouldn't you already have a facility ready to accept them? Why are you just keeping them down? Well, we'll have these. It was so stupid. And then once you find out how smart Oculus is, that it not only can communicate with you from the body of a goat, it knows pi. Here's another thing I hated. So he's drawing numbers. I mean, you could say that Oculus somehow was able to get into a dead guy's brain and learn everything, like our language, although I don't buy it. But why would he write down a 3? Why wouldn't he just go boom, boom, boom as a number 3? When I'm watching, you're writing down, how does this fucking thing know our language or our numerical system? It wouldn't know unless you assume that, it's been in the body of a dead guy, so it just has all the knowledge human beings have. I mean, I hated that. I look at that and go, come on, you guys. You can't expect us to believe that our little Oculus boy knows how to speak English or that knows our numbers. It was so dumb. It was just... But anyway, it was kind of interesting. I mean, I was interested in it, but like you said, the xenomorph, and why would suddenly a xenomorph, how would anybody know the language? Just because how does Homegirl know what she's saying to the alien? Like, assume that a newborn knows how to speak in the first place. She suddenly can communicate with this alien and tell it what to do? Why would an alien listen to her? Because she can talk? I don't know. I think I'm rambling. I need to end this show. I was going to read a bunch of other articles, but if you wanted to see the other articles, they were more generic articles about fandom. I did put them down below in the link. You can find the link down there and see what it is. 1001 Johnny says Pluto is the new Astro Boy for those not in the know. It is true. 1001 Johnny says the idea I was trying to get at is that what we consider as rights is also relative, that are in place for the current society that will change or regress depending on the needs rather than the desires of a society. Oh, I totally agree with you. Absolutely. And RRTNZ says, Rob, you're a gifted raconteur. You need to be narrating documentaries. I don't tune in often, but I always enjoy it when I do. God bless you. Get well. All get better. RRTNZ said, Apple's Foundation is a dreadful adaptation of Asimov. Well, I don't know if it's a dreadful adaptation of Asimov. It's certainly a dreadful adaptation of the books. But I think in terms of dealing with the concepts of Foundation, which admittedly is those books are very difficult to adapt. But I would say as a jumping off point, season 3 especially has gotten way better. And the ties to Asimov's robot mythology and how they've dovetailed with the Foundation is very interesting. And I find it to be, to look at it as its own thing, it's getting pretty interesting. And a lot of the ideas of Foundation are there, but it's certainly not a direct adaptation. So I would say that you're probably right about that. On that note, I think I might end this show. Yeah, because these other articles are too long. I also did want to talk a little bit about J.K. Rowling and clapping back at Emma Watson, which is interesting. I don't really talk about... It's hard to talk about J.K. Rowling without jumping into this subject matter that's going to be very divisive, but I wanted to talk about it sort of in a different way. But that, not now, not after 2 hours. But I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank you for joining me. I'm sorry I haven't been... I'll be back more regularly. I want to do more of these shows, obviously, more often and more regular. And again, I've lost a lot of subscribers lately. I'm certain it's because of my position on the Middle East, and we're going to have an interesting time tomorrow to see what's happening with Hegseth's meeting with all of our top brass. Call me crazy, but I don't think we're calling all of our admirals and captains and bringing them all to one place that's been announced is the smartest course of action. I hate to bring this up, but look what happened in Star Trek Into Darkness when they did that. But anyway, we'll see. It'll be interesting to see what that is all about tomorrow. Yeah, we're living in a sci-fi dystopia, and it gets more dystopian day after day. So if you're not watching it on the movie screen or on the TV screen, we can just watch the news. And on that note, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. I'm sorry for this rambling show, but I wanted to celebrate or talk about Star Trek The Next Generation on its 38th anniversary. What do you guys think? And I would also say, hey, go check out the Blu-rays for Star Trek The Next Generation. Look at our documentaries. We spent a long time on them. And most importantly, in Season 2, you can see that extended version of Melinda Snodgrass's The Measure of a Man. Terrific Star Trek episode made even better by the extended version. So, on that note, I will wish all of you a better day. And tomorrow's the last day of September. And it was the last day of September. It might be a date we'll always remember, because that was the day that Liberty died. Was it? No, that's just a little riff on a song you should all know. Papa was Rolling Stone. We'll see what happens. So, on that note, I will see you all on the John Campea Show tomorrow.